Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Pada pertemuan kali ini saya akan membahas tentang theories of second language acquisition, behaviorism, and interaction. Theories of second language acquisition, behaviorism. Introduction. There are some basic theories advanced to describe how language is acquired and taught. The behaviorism theory, mentalist theory, rationalist theory, empiricist theory, and cognitive code theory are some of these theories. Of these, behaviorist theory and mentalist theory are mainly applicable to the acquisition of native language, while the rest can account for foreign language acquisition. Yet, these five fundamental theories of language learning cannot be totally divorced from each other, for the objective of second language learning are not necessarily entirely determined by native language competence inevitably serves as a foil against which to set second language learning. Mother tongue and foreign language learning. These five basic theories are furthermore very much complementary to each other, serving different types of learners or representing various cases of language learning. They must not automatically make us presume that first and second language learning is identical, all or a like process. Though second language learning is strongly tied up with first language acquisition. Obviously, native language growth will pave the way for foreign language growth. Then, these five basic language learning theories are fundamental pillars of language learning whose relevance to education is undeniable. Basic tenets of behaviors theory. The following principles illustrate the operating principle of behaviorism. The first, behaviorist theory dwells on spoken language. That is, primarily medium of language is oral. Speech is language because there are many languages without written forms. Because we learn to speak before we learn to read and write. Then, language is primarily what is spoken and secondarily what is written. That's why spoken language must have a priority in language teaching. The second, behaviors theory is the habit formation theory of language teaching and learning, reminding us the learning of structural grammar. Language learning concern used by not problem solving, but the information and performance of habits. In other words, language learning is a mechanical process leading the learner to habit confirmation whose underlying scheme is the conditional reflex. Thus, it's definitely true that language is controlled by the consequence of behavior. The four, all learning is establishment of habits as the result of reinforcement and reward. Positive reinforcement is reward, while negative reinforcement is punishment. In a stimulus situation, a response is exerted, and if the response is positively augmented by a reward, then the association between the stimulus and response itself responds, and thus the response will very likely be manipulated by every appearance of stimulus. The result will yield conditioning when responses stimuli are coherently reinforced. Then habit formation is established. It is because of this fact that this theory is termed habit formation by reinforcement theory. The 5. The learning due to its socially conditioned nature can be the same for each individual. In other words, each person can learn equally if the conditioning in which the learning takes place are the same for each person. Counterarguments on the first theory of language learning. Number 1. Basic strategies of language learning within the scope of Behaviourism theory are imitation, reinforcement, and rewarding. However, researches made on the acquisition of learning have demonstrated that children's imitation of structures show evidence of almost no innovation. Moreover, children vary considerably in the amount that they imitate. Since children do not imitate such structures like words, phrases, clauses, and sentences at the same rate, they will naturally learn at different rates. Thus, it must be admitted that imitation is very useful in the acquisition of new vocabulary items. As for reinforcement, unfortunately, this view of learning receives little support from the available evidence. For the parents, only correct the sample structures, and complex structures are occasionally corrected. Number 2, in Behaviorist theory, the process of learning relies more on generalization, rewarding, conditioning, thereof which support the development of analogical learning in children, but it can be argued that a process of learning or teaching that encourages the learner to construct phrase, clause, and sentence modeled on previously stated set of rules and drill is thought to obstruct the instinctive producing of language. Then habit formation exercise might not naturally promote intrinsically oriented language learning. Number 3. Abstractions made on instinctively based learning will doubtlessly harm the creative way of learning. It takes a long time to be capable enough to master a language at last a bit intrinsically. There is a threshold level in language learning. This means that learner must learn consciously, supported by repetition and drilling to build up an effective linguistic intuition, acquisition of which marks the establishment of threshold level. Before obtaining the threshold level, the language learning is not creative, cannot use the language properly in new situation in a real sense. It is then obvious that in intrinsic learning will be delayed owing to the late acquisition of threshold level because of previously settled set of rules and drills. Number 4, the rate of social influence on learning is not satisfactorily explained. To what extent and rate does the social surrounding promote language learning? This question remains unexplained. Number 5. It is highly unlikely for learning to be the same for each individual. That is, each person cannot learn equally well in the same condition in which learning takes place. For the background and the experience of the learner make everybody learn differently. In addition, according to Chomsky, there must become some innate capacities which human being possess that predispose them to look for basic pattern in language. Number 6. The main strategies of the behaviors theory can only be true for the early stage of learning, which takes place when the kids are in infancy and in early childhood periods. Moreover, this theory is fruitful for the most part on animal experimentation and learning. The last, many of the learning process are most too complex, and for this reason there are intervening variables which cannot be observed between stimulus and response. That's why language acquisition cannot take place through habit formation. Since language learners are taught between stimulus and response change. For language is too far complicated to be learned in such a manner, especially given the brief time available. Conclusion. It is clear that language learning and its development for the behaviorist is a matter of conditioning by means of imitation, practice, reinforcement, and habituation, which constitute the base of language acquisition. It must be borne in mind that all behaviorist theories of learning are association, including Thorndike's, Goldrich's, Hall's, Skinner's, and the theory of the school of functionalism. Apparently, behaviorism has its shortcomings, but it cannot be denied that learning process is for the most part a behaviorist processing. A verbal behavior and language teaching area, behaviorism establishes the basic background of exercise, either oral or written, in viewing language as stimulus and response. In addition, it gives a great deal of insight into the recognition of the use of controlled observation to discover the laws of behavior. It has exert a great impact by influence many teaching methods on the area of language teaching. For example, audiolingual method, total physical response, and silent way embody the behaviorist view of language. Also, British structuralism has created the story of language, called situational language teaching, as seen in the achievement of British applied linguistics, such as Palmer, Hornby, and Frisbee, and the British linguistic like G.R. Firth and M.A. Key Halliday. In a word, behavior theory aims at discovering behavioral justifications for designing language teaching in certain ways, being a help of many language teaching and learning theories. It must not be forgotten that it has given a push for the creation of embraced language learning, which become very fashionable in USA and in Europe. Theories of second language acquisition interaction. What is the interaction hypothesis? The interaction hypothesis, or IH for short, is a theoretical account of second language acquisition, or SLA, which attempts to explain the role of interaction in the language learning process, as opposite to internally driven acquisition approaches. The IH sits in line with a socio-integrationist approach, which emphasizes the influence of the environment in which a learner is engaged. Nowadays, it is believed that language is developed through interaction and negotiation of meaning. Gahemi and Saleh, 2014, p. 25. Before going into more detail, however, it is important to first be familiar with the four construct, the AH compresses input, interaction, feedback, and output. Gas and Mikey 2007 subscribes these constructs as non-distinct due to the absence of specific boundaries which divide them clearly one from the other. In fact, each of the four constructs are interlinked in some way, as will be explained below. Input or output, described as gas and Mankey 2007, page 177, as the science QAnon of acquisition. Input refers to any of the linguistic form received by the learner. Put simply, input can be broadly defined as information received by the learner from an external source. Output, on the other hand, refers to the linguistic forms processed by the learner essentially internally generate replies to the other conversational party or parties in an exchange. Traditionally, these two constructs were by definition restricted to verbal, face-to-face conversation, ideally with native speaker of the L2. In more recent development of the IH. However, this narrow definition has since been expanded into include any form of linguistic data spoken, written, or typed from classroom interactions to online exchange via social media to even AI generated speech. In the context of the IH, the interlinked structures of input and output are viewed as the entities exchanged within an interactional setting, which allow interactional to happen through analyze the input and output of an individual. It is also possible to judge their relative fluency and proficiency in the language. Think the conversational segment of oral examination. Interaction, defined as the function that input and output fulfill. Interaction can generally be described as negotiation for meaning. These exercises have an interactional structure. In the context of DAH, this refers to the manner in which information is exchanged during an interaction between parties. In this structure, modification techniques such as clarification and repetition are able to come into play to facilitate negotiation for meaning. Through a successful negotiation, learners are able to determine crucial information about their utterance. For example, how standard their phrasing of a sentence was, or whether their understanding of vocabulary matches up with actual use of in context. A successful negotiation can be hindered by a variety of factors such as language barrier or cultural difference, especially different in language use, and sample across the dialect. Feedback. The structure of feedback is quite similar to input, with the crucial difference being that feedback is received in response to input. Two kinds of feedback can be identified within the context of the IH. Explicit feedback, such as or but not limited to corrections or metalinguistic explanation, and implicit feedback, including negotiation strategies such as clarification requests or comprehension or confirmation check. A fuller distinction between positive and negative feedback was later proposed. Positive feedback involved or possibly partial agreement with the learner's input. Example discussion where you expand on the ideas expressed in the input, whereas negative feedback involves rejection. Example, a teacher correction the grammar of a student in a language classroom of the learner's input. At present, the EH defined. While many internal definitions have since been broadened, the EH has remained largely unchanged since at least 1991 revision, with the exception of minor additions to strengthen and reframe the focus of interaction to specific contexts. In particular, the latter version of the EH is viewed to be closely related to another type of interaction, focused on form, where attention to form is highlighted and derived from the performance of meaningful communication tasks. Additional influence of psychology have brought the notions of selective attention and noticing into the picture in order to explain some of the EH inner workings. At its core, the EH still proposes that SLA is facilitated by understandable input and informational exchange through interpersonal interactions between speakers. Interactions are, of course, still ascribed a major role in the SLA process, besides being a significant source of language data. It is also through the active participation in interaction that much of the learning occurs. Method and data collection. The instrument used to collect descriptive data was a questionnaire that consisted of two parts. The first part was intended to collect personal information of the participant, such as their age, gender, and year at university. The second part was a question survey, largely to investigate into participants' attributions of the cause and effective interaction. Their questions were designed which are as follows. The first is interaction related to second language acquisition, how. The second, which types of interaction promote second language acquisition. The third, which are the positive effects of negotiation in language acquisition. Conclusion. The result of this research study show that if teachers try to provide opportunities for oral discussion in their classes, encourage learners to initiate topic and put some responsibility on the part of their learners, the class will be enjoyable, creative, and initiative. For the students who are either reserved or reluctant to participate in their classroom, the teacher can directly ask them to speak rather than wait for their response. The findings show that interaction can have positive effects on L2 development and that the complex matter of individual difference needs to be considered carefully. The many questions surrounding the study of interaction development and L2 learner suggest that this area will continue to provide challenge as well as insight into our understanding of the process involved in SLA. Another conclusion may be the fact that language is a thing of creativity and the ability to conform form of language to appropriate setting is one realization on this creativity. Through interaction and interpersonal relationships, creative language use play an important role as the learners engage in discussion to meet the mutual understanding. If we are to claim that our language learning is meaningful, it should be embedded in conversation. Okay, thank you for your attention, guys. And I'm closing this material to say Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.